Hello and welcome to Speed Bumps with Charlie Kimball. I'm your host, Charlie Kimball, and today I'm really excited to be joined by a friend, colleague, associate of mine. I want to introduce you to someone I would call a beacon of excellence, whose journey from Maine to the heart of Indiana has been nothing short of legendary. Allison Melangton, thank you for joining us. You've had a distinguished career spanning over 4 decades in sports. You've made your mark in sports management, and I want to talk about, just for a second, about your impact and accolades. You've worked at 9 Olympic Games. Your expertise and passion illuminated the gymnastics broadcasts on NBC Sports, captivating audiences worldwide with each breathtaking performance on your way to winning 5 Emmys for that production of the Olympics. I think that's amazing. Your work with the Indiana Sports Corps was highlighted in mobilizing over 12,000 volunteers for Super Bowl 46 in Indianapolis, a real highlight event for Indianapolis, a city known for its incredible events. It's a testament to your boundless generosity and commitment to community service. Because of that, Allison, you were recognized with the esteemed Sagamore of the Wabash Award by then Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels back in 2012. But your philanthropic endeavors didn't end there. Through your tireless efforts, you've raised an impressive $13 million to expand resources for women and children facing homelessness in central Indiana, embodying the spirit of compassion and empathy that I feel really defines your character. You're also a fellow Jefferson Award winner. So that was fun to find out. And today, as the Senior Vice President of Penske Entertainment, you continue to chart new horizons, overseeing multiple facets of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the NTT IndyCar Series, and the greatest spectacle in motorsports and in racing, the Indianapolis 500. You were a big part of the 100th running of the Indianapolis 500-mile race. And with that being the 100th running, we'll talk about that. I think that's so interesting, selling out a venue like the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Your leadership extends beyond sports. As a director on the board of directors for One America, your roles on various other boards, including the recent 2024 NBA All-Star Game there in Indiana and the St. Vincent Foundation. So now, Allison Melangton, a visionary leader, true embodiment to me of the transformative power of passion and purpose. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you so much, Charlie. I'm excited to join you today. Nothing better than a lot of good conversation.
Exactly. So I want to just start at the beginning, right? What led you to working within sports? I know you got a degree in sports management. Where did the interest come from, and what led you to sports to start with?
Well, my dad was a national champion ski jumper, if you can imagine that. I always thought race car drivers were crazy. Ski jumpers are worse. So he went to Millbury College and was a champion NCAA ski jumper back in the 50s, and went to the Olympic trials and was the alternate on the Olympic team. And so when I was little, I would go to all his competitions. And my mom would drag my sister and I around in those freezing ski jumps, and I would watch my dad practice and jump. And what I noticed from when I was a little girl is there were people organizing everything. So there was, officials, and there were people parking cars, and there were people in charge. And I kept looking around thinking, what a fun job. They get to, organize sporting events. I did love being cold all the time. So when I did get into it, I decided to do regular inside venues. But yeah, so just traveling with my dad and watching him ski jump really got my sports interest going. And then when I was in high school, I was an athlete myself in 2 or 3 sports. And then I volunteered in the athletic department after school to do some organization. And that's when I found a real love for putting all the puzzle pieces together in sports.
Well, that's amazing. I think a lot of people, especially in sports and racing, myself, fell in love through working with their parents or being dragged around to ski jumps. In your case, for me, being at the racetrack with my dad, watching racing on TV to try and catch a glimpse of him when he was traveling. So I think it's really interesting that your perspective was not about the athletes and the competitors, but about the organization. And it's obviously worked really well. So how did you go, other than not wanting to be cold all the time and moving inside, did that take you to gymnastics from, after your university journey and then moving inside to other sports?
Yeah, so I was a competitive gymnast all the way through college. And when I graduated from college, I got a job at the United States Olympic Committee. So I grew up in Maine. I went to college in Colorado on a gymnastics scholarship, and then went to work at the United States Olympic Committee, which was in Colorado Springs. And I had a great entry level job there organizing things for, at the time, was the National Sports Festival. And I worked for a wonderful mentor who I also knew from my gymnastics career, Sheila Walker. She invested a lot of time and energy in my development and stayed there a couple years and loved the job, but wanted to advance in a role. And there was a job open in Indiana at USA Gymnastics. So packed up my car, moved to Indiana sight unseen, did not know a single person. This was a long time ago. So I put an ad in the newspaper for a roommate. People don't do that anymore. But moved to Indiana sight unseen, and made a lot of new friends, and worked at USA Gymnastics for a number of years, and then transitioned to the Indiana Sports Corporation, where I ended up being for 16 years before the Super Bowl. And so in that job at USA Gymnastics, I got to travel the globe and organize sporting events all over the world. And that's where I started my Olympic career as well.
Okay, so in all of that global travel for work in that period, where was the best place you visited that you had the most fun, or you had a great event, everything you thought, all right, I'm on my path here, and getting to come here was just the cherry on the cake?
I loved Sydney, Australia for the Olympics in 2000. I really enjoyed everything about not just the Olympic experience there, but the people and the city, and how they embraced the Olympics completely. And so I would say that that was the highlight. And I worked again in Australia 2 different times after that, and each time was just so grateful. So I would say Australia is a special place for me.
I wouldn't disagree with you. Kathleen and I honeymooned there, spent some time in Sydney, and loved it. Like you say, the city's great, but the people really make it. And I would follow that up with, I think the city of Indianapolis is great, but I think Hoosiers really make it special. Um, how successful were you with getting a roommate, and what has been the best part of being in Indianapolis for the last couple decades or so?
Yeah, I did find a roommate. I did. It was funny because it was so long ago, right? We talked on the phone for maybe 3 minutes. She called me and said, "I saw your ad. I just graduated from IU. I'm looking for a roommate." We had this 3 minute conversation. She said, "I'll find an apartment and mail you a key." And so I never talked to her again. I showed up in Indianapolis in the middle of the night, and I remember going to knock on the door, thinking, "I hope she's normal. I hope this is going to work." Um, but anyway, it worked out great. We lived together for 3 years, and really enjoyed her. And, I was here probably 2 years in Indianapolis before I really felt like it was home, and before I felt some roots here and that I wanted to stay. Because in the back of my mind, the whole time, I'm thinking, well, if I don't like it here in the Midwest, I can go back to Maine, or I can go back to Colorado. But I really, really loved the people here. I loved the energy around the sports movement. There was a lot of community leaders, city leaders, business leaders, governmental leaders that were all in on this sports thing in Indiana. And of course, that all started with the Indy 500. And it was easy and accessible to get to leaders to share ideas and pull people together and cooperate and get everybody at the table to be able to come together for conclusions that were right for the city. So once I got acclimated and started participating in all these things in Indianapolis, I thought I'm really happy here, and I fit well here, and I want to have a career here, and I want to eventually have a family here. So I would say I was 2 years here before I made that decision. And I did go not long after I moved here. I went to the Indy 500. And being an event person, I was completely enamored with every single thing that happened, and thought there is no better people watching on the planet than this event.
That that's true. I one of my favorite people watching moments of the Indianapolis 500, the whole month of May, is Carb Day. Just all of Carb Day. But I remember when I was, it was then called Indy Lights, now Indy Next. And we used to race on Friday. And the 2 years I did it in 2009, 2010, the race was on Friday. And it was probably 10 in the morning watching people roll by with 12 packs of Coors Light or Miller Lite on their shoulder. And they were half gone at 10 a.m. And I thought, okay, this is a thing. And you talk about people watching, and there is nothing like it.
There,
Nothing like it.
there is nothing like it, and if you haven't been, you have to go. I remember that first time walking around, just soaking it all in, and thinking, "There's things I'm going to see today I will never unsee in my whole in my head the rest of my life." Because it is just, like a crazy Woodstock experience, but people are so happy. It is a day of happiness and joy, and some people make some poor choices and then pay the consequence later. But it is a fun day.
And we'll get into the Indy 500. I know that's where you are now, and it's my passion as well. So there's plenty to talk about the Indy 500. What was it like at the Super Bowl? You came to Indiana with USA Gymnastics and then moved to the Indiana Sports Court. You were a part of Super Bowl 46, which, living in Indianapolis myself at that period and being a part of the event, going down to Georgia Street and seeing all the activities, and I remember, and I don't know if this is real, and maybe you can confirm, but you as a sort of steering committee or an organization group had an incredible snow removal plan. February in Indiana, we can get these snowstorms, and everyone was almost disappointed you didn't get any snow, just so you could show how well planned it was.
Yes. Well, as part of that job, I got to go to 8 Super Bowls leading into Indianapolis. I was the CEO for 2012, but as a part of that, for 8 years, I went to all the Super Bowls leading up, and Dallas was the year before us. That was 2011. And Dallas got hit with a, once in 30 year horrific ice storm. The entire Super Bowl came to a screeching halt. They didn't have enough sand. They didn't have enough trucks. They couldn't get their volunteers in, and on and on and on and on and on. So we already thought we had a good snow and ice plan. But when we came back from Dallas and we had 1 year to go, we dug hard into making a plan that was going to work in all circumstances, no matter what. And we got a committee of, I think we had 64 people on this snow removal committee, because we're going to go all in. We're going to be great. We had practices. We had all kinds of things. And we had a 3-inch binder that we distributed to all 60 people. All the agencies were aligned. We had meetings all the time. And then it came, and we didn't need it at all. But I would rather be prepared, because I could sleep at night and I wasn't worried about it, because I knew if we got a similar storm to Dallas, then we would be able to execute the plan and everything would be fine. And in the end, God shone on us and gave us sunshine every day.
And it was great weather. I remember walking downtown in just a light jacket or a sweatshirt and thinking, man, this someone made a good call here, because it was so much fun. And now, I'm a father to a daughter, and so I'm really curious, in your perspective, the NFL is typically a male-dominated sport. What was it like working with the NFL on that Super Bowl event, being CEO of that Super Bowl as a woman? You talked about your female mentor earlier in your sports management career. Um, what was that like? And also, how important do you see mentorship in business, and mentorship as a woman in business, in sports management, in your role now and for the future?
And I'll probably answer those in reverse. So first, on the mentorship, I feel like it's absolutely important. And if I had not had good female mentors ahead of me that invested time in me, invested development in me, I might have struggled more in that job, because I was frequently the only woman in the room, whether it was at the NFL or whether we were in the team meetings. Almost always, I was the only female. So I had strong women before me that helped me prepare for that position by the time I got there. So I believe in mentors. I also believe that males are great mentors for females also, and I've had plenty of great male mentors as well. So, from the female perspective with the NFL, I was the second woman in 46 Super Bowls to be the CEO. And so, that had some challenges with it because it was surprising to a lot of people that there was a female lead for that. I will say, after me, there's been 5 or 6 other women, so that has been a great thing. And I'll give you one story that was just here in Indianapolis that wasn't an NFL interaction, but I got my car serviced at one of the service stations here locally, and then there's a van that takes you downtown to bring you to work. And then at the end of the day, they pick you back up during the day while your car's being serviced, which is a wonderful opportunity so that you don't have to have someone drop you off. So I dropped it off early in the morning. I jumped in the van and I got in the back. And then 4 gentlemen got in front of me and the driver. And we were driving downtown and a Super Bowl commercial came on the radio. Everybody was listening to it. And then when it was over, the gentleman that was sitting right in front of me in the van turned to the gentleman to his left and he said, I still can't believe that our city, meaning our governor and our mayor, hired a woman to run our Super Bowl. I can't believe, I don't know what they were thinking. Of course, I'm 3 inches behind him. And I'm sitting there like,
Right.
Ouch. But I decided I'm going to consciously listen to what they're saying in the conversation because there's got to be something here I can learn from this. And so between the 5 gentlemen, they were talking about it. They weren't they weren't saying anything about me personally. Just shocked that the mayor and the governor would hire a woman. And what I learned from that conversation was that it was a lot about education. They didn't understand the job. They didn't understand that it was a $50 million budget, that I had to find 12,000 volunteers and train them and outfit them and prepare them, that I had to do a full security plan, that I had to do a transportation plan, that we had to work with the airport, that we had 50 businesses we had to work on. So on and on and on and on. What I learned was they didn't understand the job. And so instead of saying something in that environment, which I might not have said, that might not have been as becoming of who I really am because I was a little flustered, or their choice was getting out of the car and handing them a business card and making them all feel bad. And that's not really who I am as a person either. So in the end, I chose to get out and go to work and dig in. And I had my public profile at that point. I had tons of opportunity in the public, lots of press conferences constantly and so on. I decided it was my job to make sure that I talked about what the job was, not just about me, but our leadership team was almost all female. And that was because I matched skills to what I needed in the jobs. It wasn't because they were women versus men. So, right. Back to your original question, there was a lot of that, like just big surprise that a woman would be in that job, but I didn't take it personal, and I decided to use that opportunity to educate.
Even more impressed with you than before we started this conversation, because there is no way I'd have been able to hold my tongue on your behalf, right? Looking back now, wow. And there are 2 things that really struck me during that story was, firstly, the proof was in the pudding, right? You and your team and everybody that came in as a part of that event ran an incredible event. People still talk about Indianapolis as one of the greatest Super Bowls in the last 25 years. And it reminds me a lot of when people hear that I have diabetes and, I have type 1 and I'm insulin dependent. And they say, oh, well, you can't have cookies. I won't offer you dessert. And for a long time, and when I am tired and when I am not at my best, I will admit it's easier for me to lash out and I am not as good as I'd like to be. But a lot of time I say, well, actually, and it's an opportunity to educate. Like you said, it was an opportunity to educate them of what the job was and what it looked like and why it didn't matter male or female. It mattered best person for the role to make the event incredible and make Indiana and Indianapolis look spectacular, which it did. And so for me, that education, it's sometimes overlooked as a way to respond to criticism, right? Because like you said, you realize they didn't understand what was happening. I realized that people don't understand the differences between type 1 and type 2 diabetes and how that works. And so if I can teach somebody, then maybe they can teach someone else, and pretty soon it grows exponentially.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, especially because it was really busy and a lot of stress going on during that whole period. And whenever I would encounter a situation like that, I had a little phrase that I stuck in my head that I would just pull out to help me work through it. But it was respond, don't react. And I would say that to myself, respond, don't react. And it was helpful.
I think a lot of people in this world could use that as a tool for a lot of different things, right? It's you want to respond, you don't need to react. You talk about mobilizing 12,000 volunteers. One of the things that I remember vividly during that build up to the Super Bowl, that whole NFL season, talking about culminating in Indianapolis for that championship Super Bowl event and game, was that it felt like the whole city, everybody within central Indiana was a part of that. 12,000 volunteers, that's not a small number. What about community outreach and collaboration is important for you when you're running events? And why do you think it leads to such successful events? Because I've seen it firsthand, both at that Super Bowl and now at the Indianapolis 500.
I am a firm and passionate believer that to be able to really maximize these sports events opportunities, you have to make it, more than the race, more than the game. And to do that, you have to lead people to know and understand that they are a piece of the puzzle to all of these things. And that the taxi cab driver that picks somebody at the airport, or the Uber driver that picks somebody up at the airport and brings them downtown for the race or the Super Bowl or the Final Four or the NBA All-Star game, they are just as important as many of the other positions, because they're a piece of the guest experience, and people encounter them first thing, right when they get off the airport. So for the Super Bowl, we did all kinds of trainings for the cab drivers and the Uber drivers and made them understand how important they are. It's not just that they're just the Uber driver. They're valued, they bring something special to the event, and they make every little puzzle piece come together to make the mosaic of what we want this to be. And that's been how Indianapolis has done this, over all these years very successfully. And I was the beneficiary of it, the Super Bowl, because I was in the middle of collecting all those 12,000 people and getting people to knit scarves for the volunteers and getting them to do all the projects that we did together. People want to feel like they belong to something. And when you can link arm in arm all the volunteers, all the businesses, the staff, and everyone, so they're all marching in the same direction, on the same page for the same thing. It's a power that you can unleash on anything and be successful. And that's what we did for the 100th running of the Indy 500, and what we continue to do today.
Well, and that's exactly where I was going next. Thank you very much. The 100th running of the Indy 500, it was a total sellout. And I'm not going to be able to talk about this without getting goosebumps, having been a part of it. I mean, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, for anyone who's listening who hasn't been to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, put it on your list. To the Indianapolis 500 as a sporting event and a race. Even if you can't go on race day, if you happen to be in Indiana and Indianapolis for a convention, or driving through on your way home from college on a practice day, go and feel it. And it's not see it, it's feel it, because it is, and I realize I'm biased here and you're probably biased as well, but it's visceral. It's a massive venue. How did you and your team and everybody at Penske Entertainment and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the IndyCar Series, come together to, this is going to sound wrong, but it's the word that comes to mind, to pull off an event of that size?
Yeah, it was, of all the different things I've done, it probably was my career highlight, because 350,000 people in one location in one day is like having 5 Super Bowls at the same time. And we really didn't have any hitches. But that took intense planning for, 2 or 3 years to pull it off, as you would say. But what I would tell you is, we harnessed that energy that this whole region had to celebrate something that in Indiana for 100 years. And there's not many sporting events on the planet that have had anything in their communities for 100 years. And we've had that. And so for Hoosiers and the region to be proud of being able to host that event, honor the history, honor their traditions, honor the drivers that have been in it all those years, the drivers that were in it that year in 2016. We took all these different important, passionate things about the race and pulled it together with a local organizing committee and community leaders. We had tons of meetings with the city leadership, and that means businesses, that means governmental leadership. And we brought everybody along so they were educated, so they cared a lot about it. They cared about the execution. I mean, we were broadcast in 280 countries, I think. And so everybody was going to see a window into the rest of the world would see a window into Indianapolis and what it was and what it represented and what the people were like. And that's a responsibility that we were all carrying, and that we wanted to put our best foot forward across everything. And again, you link arm in arm, you're in the foxhole with everybody and you do it together. It's not different factions of people doing different things. And that's how you get a powerful tsunami movement of everybody working together to pull off what was the 100th running of the Indy 500. And it was probably my career highlight.
Well, that's and I remember, like, every year it's just about every seat is sold. As a driver, to put you in that cockpit with me for a moment on the parade laps. One of the best advice as a driver before my first Indy 500 back in 2011 was, on the parade lap, take that first lap and soak in the atmosphere. And all month long, the grandstands have people in them, but they're not sold out. So there's a lot of silver poking through. But on race day, it's full. The thing I remember about the 100th running, and it will never leave me, was that the first lap, the grandstands were full and there was no silver. You couldn't see a single grandstand seat. But the second lap, I looked to my left and I looked at the infield, and usually there were people lining the fence. In the 100th running, they were 10, 20, 30 people deep the whole 2.5 miles around. And I just remember thinking how big that was, right? It was just, right. And I had my race face on. I was ready to go do 500 miles at 200 plus miles an hour with 32 other crazy drivers. And I remember thinking, that's a lot of people. And it was wild. It really stuck with me.
It's interesting. You have these different moments in your career that you remember, you crystallize them in your mind forever. And about 3 weeks before that Indy 500, I pulled all the staff leadership together because tickets were selling. And I got them together. It was like 3:00 in the afternoon. And I said, is there a point that we sell out? And everybody, including Doug Bulls, no, we have 500 acres here. No, we're never going to sell out. I said, I think there's a point that we stop selling tickets, because at some point you don't have enough toilet paper, you don't have enough water, the crowd control. At some point we need to stop selling tickets, and I think we're there. And there was not a person. There's probably 12 of us. They're like, no. So I said, we're going to dig through this in great detail. We're going to stay here as long as it's going to take us tonight. We actually pulled an all-nighter. I sent a couple people home because they could not say. I hadn't done that since college. And we went into our photos. We pulled up big aerial maps of the year before. And back to your infield story, we pulled up, big, huge pictures of what the infield was from satellite photos. And we looked at where we could put more people, what pockets we had. And we just, at the 5 a.m., we came to the conclusion, we need to stop selling tickets. And I called Mark Miles at 6 and I said, I need you to come in early. I got to talk to you. And when I started talking to him, he's all furrowed browed. What do you mean? What do you mean? I said, no, we need to stop selling tickets. And then I got Doug on board and then Mark on board. And then we talked to the board of directors. And I said, at some point, you're not going to give customers a great experience. And I think we're going to be there right now. And so we stopped.
I've never heard the behind the scenes on how like you get to a moment where you're like, we can't support the experience
Right.
for our fans, our guests, our visitors past this volume. It to like I love the visual of you and Doug and your team standing around a conference table with satellite photos looking at the infield going, well, we could get another 10,000 there, or maybe 3 or 4,000 over here, and we've put these extra suites up, and we've done this and we've done that. But where do we add more bathrooms? Where do we add more water delivery, concessions, all of those things? How incredibly interesting. Okay, so looking back on that event as the highlight of your career so far, and that conversation in the infield, and people and tolerance, what was the biggest speed bump? Name of the podcast is Speed Bumps. We've got to get there eventually. What thing maybe tripped you up that you weren't expecting building for an event of that size and that historical nature? Was there anything, or did it, was there something you look back and go, I wish I'd have done that better? Or, I mean, there's obviously learning experiences, but a speed bump that you got through.
Yeah, I mean, there were tons of, I would say, small speed bumps throughout. When you keep selling tickets like that, where do you get more ice? Home City Ice, who's the ice vendor, was like, we can't make that much ice. It's impossible. So we had lots and lots of logistics of things that we hadn't dealt with before that we had to work through. And probably the thing I was the most proud of is we sat down and we worked hard. We worked really hard at the plan and went over and over and over it, because there was a speed bump every day, because we'd never had that many. No event in the history of the world had ever had that many people together. And so how do you deliver so if you have the concessions and you've got enough food, how do you get the golf carts between all those people? So I would say there was a speed bump every day the last 90 days. But we aligned, with the people that we needed to align with. We were thoughtful. We did not panic every time something came up, and we responded versus reacted. And we were none of us tried to lead the role like that we knew more than everybody else, because nobody had ever done this before. So we leaned on each other, we problem solved together, and we made decisions together and used each other's wisdom. And I think, in the end, we had all the right outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. As a driver, as a fan, as a Californian Hoosier, it was an incredible outcome and a great event. And it's really interesting hearing you say there was a speed bump every day, right? There was something that could have tripped you up every day, and working as a team and responding, not reacting, was meant that as those things came up, you were able to work through them and find answers and find solutions that worked and kept working up to an incredible race day. So personally, I think you should be very proud of you and your team, because it was a lot of fun to be a part of, and something that finishing in the top 5 that day, I definitely feel like was a feather in my cap to be close to the running for a win on the 100th running the Indianapolis 500. So now speed bumps.
Yeah, well, and congrats on that, by the way. Congrats on that. That's a big finish on that year. That
It
was
was
great.
a lot of fun, and it was so interesting because there were 2 different fuel. I mean, we can talk racing, and I could dive into all the different things that happened that day. But back to speed bumps. In your career, working in sports management, the opportunity to educate people about the job you do, running an event, running a Super Bowl, running an Indy 500, being a part of a team now at Penske Entertainment with multiple properties, not just the Indy 500, but the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and the other events there, the IndyCar series, a TV production, a radio network, working at USA Gymnastics, Olympics. What's been the biggest surprise speed bump in your career? For me, that's an easy answer. Going into the doctor as a 22-year-old and coming out with diabetes, that was a huge shock, but something I've gotten over and continued on with my career. Has there been any surprise speed bumps in your career that you weren't ready for, but you look back and go, I learned a lot and I'm better because of it?
It's funny because I think most of the hard speed bumps that I learned were producing live television, because you can't control everything. And yeah, I'll give you one example. The first time it happened at the Olympics in 1984. Yes, I am that old. I was at the 1984 Olympic Games working, and while I wasn't in charge, I was in the television production truck, and we were producing the finals in women's event apparatus. And we had one of our Americans on the uneven bars, which was a huge moment. The LA Olympics were getting great ratings. It was, live, and every light in the arena went out. And it was black. And you're on live TV. It's like, okay, but and then it's just an unfolding of what just happened and what are we going to do and what are we going to tell the talent to say, and are our crews safe out in the middle, because they're up on the podium with cameras, and are the athletes okay? I mean, so that was probably my first, and then there was probably 50 more after that, in all the years, where on live TV you think you have a plan, you have a format that's listed every second, for the 3 hours, and you're going to stick to it. And it doesn't happen that way. And that was probably the TV part of my career was a great learning experience for all these other things like the Super Bowl and the 100th running, because you had to respond in those things. You could not panic because you're on live TV, and you had to have a plan, and you had to instruct other people, and you had to do it really, really quickly. And so I think that over the years, I was trained in that in TV sports. So even when, big things happen, big speed bumps and other things, I take a moment, like, okay, I'm going to take a breath, and then we're going to figure out what to do, because of that training I had at the Olympics in the TV truck.
That's really interesting. Now, with me being one of that talent you talk about on the broadcast side, as a driver and an athlete in motorsports, you don't have any idea of all of the things that are going on in the way background. And now, I mean, I remember going home from an IndyCar race and watching the race and being like, oh yeah, it's great coverage. Like you hear the commentators and you're like, oh, I'd really like to see where this car is. And then it shows up and you don't think about the 5, 10, 50, 100, 150 people all working together to make that happen. And then when the lights go out, all of those people responding appropriately. And now seeing a little bit behind the curtain. I don't have nearly the experience in TV broadcast. I don't have an Emmy. I don't have 5 Emmys like you. Being able to see some of that happening in the background and hear some of it on the headsets in the broadcast booth, it gives you a whole new understanding of what live TV is like. And in fact, I did an interview with James Hinchcliffe, and we were talking about his experience on Dancing with the Stars and how being a part of a live show on network television like that, how that set him up and prepared him a little bit for the live sports broadcasting in IndyCar. With Lee Diffie and Townsend Bell and their collaboration, and pit reporters and producers and directors and all of and cameramen that are listening, camera people that are listening to the broadcast. And James said it's amazing working with professionals like that, because you start talking about what one car is doing on strategy and the camera people start following that. So the director picks that, right? And you just get that same rush as a competitor on a TV production. And so being able to look back and say, okay, I'm going to take a breath. Literally, the lights have gone out. I'm going to take a breath, and I have to deal with, what do we say on air to the people that are consuming this for these incredible ratings for the LA Olympics? What am I doing with my camera crew so they're safe? What am I doing with our athletes? Because there is some responsibility to those athletes in that moment as well. So, what a great perspective. Take a breath and then respond, and start responding quickly and clearly. I
Yeah,
think
and the people that you are instructing and directing, they're going to take the tone you have. So if you're kind of like, okay, they're going to all act like that too, which you can't, because you have to execute whatever you're telling them to do. So the calmer you can be in giving the instruction, even though inside, your stomach's doing backflips saying, what am I going to do here? But you've got to be able to maintain that. And I think some of that comes with age, and having to have a lot of speed bumps over different periods. Some of it, that wisdom comes with age, but no matter what, it doesn't help to get hysterical, because then you're not going to do anything that's going to benefit anybody.
Yeah, I think adding chaos to a chaotic event is never helpful. And it's amazing to talk about when things get really busy on a racetrack. I think about some of the races at Texas when we were 2 wide, 5 deep, and it's really busy, and it's really easy for that anxiety to ratchet up. And the best strategists, the best spotters, the best people in a driver's ear are the ones that are like, here's what's going on. Nope. Inside, outside, this, that. It's all the information and none of the drama, which is how much fun to look back on that experience and be like, and you came out the other side, right? You the 1984 Olympics was not the last Olympics you ever worked, right? It was
and every single Olympics had something like that. That was my first one. But every one of them had something like that, because you can't control it all, and you're supposed to be, broadcasting it, but nothing ever goes as planned, and that in the broadcast career that you've got.
So you talked about the butterflies in the stomach in that moment where you're like, okay, I've just got to get through this. I've got to respond. I can't react. I'm just going to get as much of the information out there as possible. That's kind of a silent speed bump, right? Not a lot of people, especially when you are super even keeled on the surface and you get that information out there. Have there been any other challenges that you want to talk about? And we don't have to, obviously, but is there been anything that you've been like, oh man, if people knew how hard that was for me, or I really, looking back now, I'm proud at how I handled that moment that no one else really knew was hard. What did that teach you? And could you put your finger on 1 or 2 moments that were those silent speed bumps?
Let me think. I have one that's kind of funny. Can I share a funny one?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Hey, you're our guest. You're in charge.
So when I was in my 30s, I had a 3-year-old at home. I was working crazy hours, and was actually working a swimming Olympic trial event. And it was in Indianapolis. And I literally worked like 20 days in a row, and I had maybe 3 or 4 hours sleep at night. And I knew I was tired, but I didn't probably realize quite how tired I was. And so this is one of those lifelong lessons when people say, did you ever have a challenge? So I got home late at night, like 2:00 in the morning from work. And then I had to be back at the pool, pick up some athletes for an interview, take them to our local NBC affiliate, and then go to the pool and get everybody going for the day. So when I got home, I threw my polo shirt and long walking shorts, because it's in a natatorium, warm pool, threw them in the washer, laid down for 2 hours, got up, put the clothes in the dryer. Then I finished what I needed to do, put my shirt on, put my fanny pack on, because I'm an event fanny pack wearer. And then I always have a fanny pack on, because that's where I keep all my critical items. And then my shorts waistband was wet, so I threw the shorts back in the dryer. And then I finished getting ready, got my computer, packed up my backpack, and then realized I was late. Jumped in the car, drove downtown. It was like 5:20 in the morning. And on the way downtown, I remember thinking, I'm really tired. And this is the last day of the event, and I'm glad that it's the last day, because I need to get caught up in some rest. So I pulled up to the Marriott, jumped out of the car. I went into the hotel lobby to pick up these 2 athletes. And I was standing there, and the bellman comes over to me, and he says, "Ma'am, are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm tired, but I'm okay." Yeah. He says, "Are you sure?" He's very concerned. "Are you sure you're okay?" And I said, "I think I'm okay, but you're making me think I'm not okay." So he looked down, And so I looked down, I followed his eyes, I looked down, and I was standing there in my underwear with my fanny pack on.
You forgot.
I was so tired. I had worked so much, I was so tired, and it was hot. It was July, it was 90 degrees out. I did not realize I didn't have my pants on. So
Oh,
I
shoot.
said, I appreciate your concern, sir, and you're right. I'm not okay. I'm going to go out to my car and I'm going to sort out myself. But I remember getting in my car and in the pull around at the Marriott. And I remember thinking, are you kidding? I am so tired that I didn't realize I didn't have pants on. And I just went into the Marriott Hotel. And I need to hit reset in my life so that I can get to a place where I know this is coming, that I'm getting too tired, and I need to stop what I'm doing, and I need to have a little more balance, and I need to not be such a perfectionist and back off a little bit so that I can act like a normal human being. But it was a really
And remember to
yeah,
put
it
pants
was a
on.
really good life moment for me because I have had the discipline since that when I feel like I'm getting that chaotic, no sleep, not eating right, in these jobs, this is what happens. But I know when I'm getting there ever since then, and I can pull back and say, all right, I'm getting there and I need a minute to myself and I need to get some sleep. I don't know if I would call it a speed bump, but it was a life bump and a life bump that I said,
Yeah,
okay, I am going to fix it.
I definitely bumpy in that moment, and how kind of the bellman to come up and say, "Hey, I think maybe let me help you out here." Well, I thank you for sharing. I can imagine that's not a story that often comes up, so I really appreciate you sharing that with us, Allison. And
I did go back and talk to him like 5 days later. I did go tell him I was okay and thanked him for his concern.
that's incredible. And I mean, we've talked about Hoosiers during this show, and I think that's very indicative of Indiana people. Hey, let me see. Do you need some help? Because I'm here to help if you need it. Very much so. Well, I like to close out the show with my guests with three kind of rapid fire questions. Firstly, what's the best advice you ever got, and from whom?
One of my mentors has been since I was in my 20s, Jack Swarbrick, who's the athletic director at Notre Dame. Really good friend and invested a lot of time in me when I was in my 20s. And he told me one day we were flying to do a presentation at the Olympics in Atlanta in 1996. And we were having a conversation, and I was probably talking too much and interrupting him, preparing for it. And he grabbed my hand, which was not normal. He grabbed my hand and looked at me and said, I love you, but I said, yeah, okay, tell me what it is. He said, you are so good at so many things, but you need to learn to be comfortable in silence. And you know what? He was right, because anytime I was in a business meeting, and I used this to my advantage during the Super Bowl job, but when it would get quiet in a room or quiet in a business meeting, I would feel like I had to fill in some air there. But learning to be comfortable in silence and confident in those settings where you didn't need to just fill air was really helpful for me in developing my career. So I've always appreciated that he told me that. I think I was, probably late 20s at the time.
That's great advice. I think a lot of people could hear that and learn to be comfortable in silence. My engineer at one point, my race engineer at one point over the years, said, if you're talking, you're not listening, and that kind of very similar, right? If you're
Very similar.
sitting there and listening, you will hear more, even if it's
Yep.
silent. You will hear and hear more than if you're talking. All right, number two for you. What's your dream car in your garage? Do you have it in your garage? Do you want it? I'm a car guy. Got to ask about cars.
Okay, well, dream car, I don't know if I want to own it, but right now I'm driving a dream car. It's the new Corvette, the Indy 500 Corvette that I'm driving right now. That's super fancy, a little hard to get in and out of, but once you're in it, it's really fun to drive.
I am unbelievably jealous of you. I think the Corvette C8 is very jealous. So this podcast could get a lot shorter because I'm very jealous about the car that you're driving at the moment in anticipation of this year's Indy 500. Okay, last one, number 3, the most interesting personal interaction or conversation you've ever had with an athlete or, in business, a colleague, a friend. You've talked about being some incredible places all over the world. Olympics in Brazil, in LA, in Atlanta, going to Sydney, Australia. Where has that sort of sphere of yours connected with someone that you look back and remember so vividly?
I would say it was Condoleezza Rice, headed into Super Bowl weekend when I was the CEO here in Indianapolis. And she came in our office. She was there for the Super Bowl. She came in our office and she walked around to every person in the staff, in their offices. We didn't have a big meeting or anything. And she thanked every person for the work that they had been doing, and was really an encourager, to say, you guys are almost at the finish line. And she didn't know any of us. She had one contact with one of our staff people and asked if she could come by and say hello to everybody and just encourage us to get through the next 4 or 5 days. And you know what? It sticks with me to this day. And I try to do that with the NBA All-Star Game staff. I went over there, brought them food, headed into their weekend, because it's hard. These events are hard to execute. And it was a really good lesson for me. She did that to me. I'll always be grateful, and I try to then pay it forward.
That's incredible. What a moment to have somebody like Condoleezza Rice's statue come through and be like, "Oh, you guys are there. Great work. Keep it up." And I think there's a great lesson for everybody in there that it often doesn't take a lot of time or energy or effort and can have a huge impact. Well, Allison, I don't think I can thank you enough. What an enlightening look into sports management events, everything from Olympics to the Super Bowl to the Indianapolis 500. I will say to all of our listeners, again, I think we're probably both a little or a lot biased, but if you haven't gone to the Indianapolis 500, even if you're not a sports fan, it should be on your bucket list, because the size of the event, the scale of the spectacle, it still gives me goosebumps just talking about it, let alone driving through the gates on 16th Street to come into the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. You just viscerally feel the history of that event. Allison, good luck for this year's Indianapolis 500, for future Indy 500s, and thank you for your time and insight and education. And for me, coming out of here, I'm going to work on responding and not reacting when people say things that I'm surprised by.
Well, thank you for having me, Charlie. It's always great to visit with you.
Thanks, Allison.